Good afternoon, everybody. So I am Thea Lee. I'm here to talk to you today about a topic that is close to my heart, and that is the importance of traceability and supply chain transparency in the critical minerals sector, especially as it relates to labor conditions. Critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, and nickel play a vital role in renewable energy technology. It's important to understand that these minerals are sometimes extracted under harsh conditions involving child and forced labor and other violations of workers' rights. I have been a lifelong advocate for workers' rights, but I'm also an advocate for climate-responsible policies. And those two things come together and make it our responsibility to ensure that these minerals are sourced ethically. To start, I wanted to share with you a couple of stories that highlight the challenges we face in the critical minerals sector. I wanted to start by talking about a young Congolese boy named Paul. Paul never attended school. He was just 12 years old when he started working in a cobalt mine. It was back-breaking work, and he often worked 24-hour shifts, spending the entire time underground without any breaks or proper equipment. He was paid a couple of dollars a day, and his health suffered greatly, almost certainly leaving lifelong damage and undermining his ability to be a productive and successful worker throughout the rest of his life. While Paul's story may not be the norm for every child working in mining, it is also not unique. Thousands of children work in the cobalt sector, often in dangerous and exploitative conditions. Some are as young as 4, preschool age. They miss out on education, suffer from physical and mental health problems, and have little hope for a better future. But the thing about child labor is that it doesn't just scar individuals and their families. It also is a terrible economic development strategy, robbing countries of future productivity and economic growth for a generation to come. The International Labor Organization estimates that 27 million people work in forced labor worldwide. Many of them labor in mines and factories that supply raw materials for the green energy sector. Another person I wanted to talk to you about is Zhang Qiang, a Chinese laborer who moved to Indonesia as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. He left home with the promise of a high-paying job and the hope that he could provide a better life for his family. But soon after arriving at a plant that smelts nickel for electric car batteries, he realized he had been tricked. His actual salary was substantially less than he had been promised. His passport was taken, leaving him no way to return home. He learned that he would only be paid 10% of his wages in cash, with the rest of his salary withheld until after the project was completed. Zhang realized he was trapped and eventually hired a human smuggler in a desperate attempt to get back home. These examples expose the grim reality of the exploitation taking place in the critical minerals sector. Our transition to a sustainable future must not be built on the backs of vulnerable people and children. That is where my bureau, the International Labor Affairs Bureau, that I head at the Labor Department, comes in. Our mission is to promote labor rights, combat child and forced labor and other abusive labor conditions in global supply chains, in collaboration with governments, unions, NGOs, and private sector partners. Supply chain transparency and traceability is critical, as our previous speaker was just saying, so that companies can identify and mitigate risks of child and forced labor in their supply chains. It starts with research on labor abuses worldwide. iLab puts out a couple of reports. One is an annual report on the worst forms of child labor, but the other is a report that comes out every 2 years, which is the list of goods produced with child or forced labor. And it has been a critical resource for many, many years. Recently, Congress asked us to expand our mandate for this list, so that we aren't just listing goods that are made with child or forced labor, but goods that might be made with inputs tainted with forced or child labor. And so for the first time, our 2022 list included 10 downstream goods, including lithium-ion batteries made with child labor from cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So some of that cobalt produced by Congolese children like Paul, under often horrific conditions, is a key input for many lithium-ion batteries made in China. And so we are now listing Chinese lithium-ion batteries as being produced with material made with child labor. So this information is something that consumers and businesses both can use. Our research methodology exposes some of the complex global supply chains by examining how inputs are processed, traded, and ultimately end up in products that are found in American stores and households. But we believe it is possible for companies to responsibly source artisanally mined cobalt. But it will take some big changes. It means formalization. Artisanal mining supports up to 2 million jobs in the Congo alone. Formalization will standardize safety, environmental, and labor protections for these workers. And we're working with our partners in the interagency throughout the US government, with the Democratic Republic of Congo government, and with the private sector to push for a national standard that enshrines acceptable conditions of work in this sector. These standards should ensure that supply chains are free of child and forced labor, and that workers are free to organize and bargain collectively. Earlier today, I spoke at 2 events, part of the Summit for Democracy that is happening here in DC and around the world, talking about the importance of unions to vibrant, robust democracies. The standard can guarantee that workers can mine safely and are paid a living wage. We hope to see the private sector commit to a system that amplifies worker voice up and down the supply chain. And I hope the private sector will support the formalization agenda. What this means is recognizing that there is artisanal cobalt in your supply chains. It means integrating worker voice, high labor standards, and accountability for labor rights violations into your due diligence process. It also means working with mining cooperatives and unions to improve labor conditions for Congolese mining communities, to recognize a union when the workers try to organize. We are working directly with the DRC government to help them address labor and occupational safety and health violations in mining. One of the key issues that I saw when I was in Kinshasa last year was the lack of resources around labor inspection and enforcement. So when I was in Kinshasa, I was pleased to announce a new labor inspectorate capacity building project funded by the US Department of Labor. This month, the Ministry of Labor in the DRC is actively recruiting 2,379 inspectors and controllers. We hope these commitments will support the broader formalization agenda because strong labor enforcement and inspection is essential to having any kind of a system in place. But technology also plays a vital role in addressing labor abuses, including child labor in the production of lithium-ion batteries. By using technology such as blockchain and other digital tools, we can create a more transparent and accountable supply chain that is traceable from mine to manufacturer. The DOL-funded Global Trace Protocol project will soon pilot its newly developed traceability tool on DRC cobalt. Data collection field staff will be collecting data on site with a phone app. Using the app, operators scan tags at each step of the supply chain, creating an uninterrupted digital record of chain of custody. With this tool, we can trace the source of these materials all the way back to the mines where they were produced, so we can verify that no child or forced labor was involved in their production. We're also working with partner agencies like the US Geologic Survey to leverage satellite imagery and artificial intelligence to identify areas where child and forced labor might be occurring. These are just a few examples of the work that we are doing to combat labor abuses in green energy supply chains. But there's so much more to be done, and companies have an enormous role to play in ensuring that the materials used in renewable energy technologies are produced ethically and sustainably. We know that companies face significant challenges in achieving supply chain transparency, but we also know that it's possible with enough will. We have seen companies like Apple and BMW take concrete actions to promote supply chain transparency in the critical minerals sector. So all of us here today, government officials, business leaders, are in a unique position to take the concrete steps to ensure that global green energy supply chains are on track to be free of child labor and forced labor as soon as possible. We know that traceability and supply chain transparency are critical for promoting responsible sourcing of critical minerals, but we can't leave the conversation here. We also know that the world is changing. The European Union is requiring mandatory due diligence in their supply chains. The United States is stepping up to enforce the ban on the import of goods made in whole or in part with forced labor, as well as the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which creates a rebuttable presumption that goods made in Xinjiang, China, are in fact made with forced labor. These tools are powerful and they're motivating. And what it means is that not taking responsibility for the supply chain may turn out to be an irresponsible business practice because of the heightened scrutiny and the enforcement actions that are being taken. So I challenge all of you representing your companies here today to take these ideas back to the C-suite, to build the systems for transparency in your own supply chains, and to create products that are not just profitable, but are free of exploitation. Thank you so much.